talking back.
Welcome to Decision Space, the only podcast that takes place right here in the space between the turns of your favorite games. I'm Jake.
And I'm Brendan.
And today we will be covering Imhotep by Phil Walker Harding, PWH, Decision Space favorite, and I think this is actually the first of his games that we're giving the full Decision Space treatment to. So needless to say, a very exciting episode. Brendan, how are you doing today?
I'm doing really well, Jake. I'm excited to cover a Phil Walker Harding game. I feel like you and Paul did talk about summer camp, but not in a deep dive episode.
Right.
And I think people will be surprised maybe that we're tackling Imhotep as our first deep dive of Phil Walker Harding. But just because even though it was a run-up for Spiel des Jahres, maybe not the most talked about game. So I'm curious to see if we sort of get into why that might be, but also why it's a dope game that people should talk about.
Yeah, and if you are interested in Phil Walker Harding as a designer, definitely go back and check out that episode because I think he's definitely a really interesting guy with some pretty compelling through threads through a lot of his designs, which maybe we'll touch on here, but we did a lot more back in that episode. So I think definitely an interesting designer that perhaps doesn't get recognized in the same breath as some other designers, but really I think one of the preeminent people designing games in our hobby right now.
And we might be slightly bearing the lead because people might not know who Phil Walker Harding is, but you definitely know some of his games like Sushi Go or Baron Park, or maybe even some of his newer ones like his Roll and Write Silver and Gold, or his older ones like his card game Archaeology.
Absolutely. For our pre-planners out there, I do want to let you know that next week we'll be covering another of our Decision Space favorite designers in Bruno Catala's game, Kingdomino.
Bruno Catala strikes back. I'm so excited. This is a little game with a huge decision space that's also available on Board Game Arena. It plays, I would say play it if you're curious at following along, once with 3 or 4 players and once with 2 players in the 7x7 Mighty Duel variant. And you'll be good to go for next week's episode.
Yeah, definitely one you can very quickly knock out some games of and get up to speed. And you won't regret it. Spoiler alert. So let's get right into this week's episode, a discussion of Imhotep, starting out, as we always do, with our ratings and slogans for the game. Brendan, will you please give us your rating and slogan first?
Imhotep is a bit like building a birdhouse alongside a few friends, all equipped with the same exact base materials and tools. Ostensibly, if given an hour, if equally skilled at birdhouse building, then all of your birdhouses should come out exactly the same. After all, you had access to the exact same set of tools, the exact same pieces to put together, and yet Jake over here somehow built the Cadillac of Avian boats, and Joe's got a multi-story hawk hotel, and somehow I'm just hoping the roof keeps the rain out of my stupid birdhouse. That's Imhotep. Imhotep is a great game, quite good actually, but its feigned variety gestures at its one real issue, that every game of Imhotep can start to feel a bit too similar. Ultimately, it's a game I'd always be happy to play, but might not suggest or seek out to own myself. 7.75 solid stones out of 10.
That's an amazing synopsis. I'm picturing your birdhouse, and that metaphor is kind of like the the gingerbread house of birdhouses with they're always kind of about to fall over. The gingerbread house on every cooking competition show I've ever seen that's in last place. It's slowly caving in on the sad camera shot.
The icing's falling off a little bit. It wasn't mixed right. Yeah, exactly.
Wow. Okay. All right. So for me, I'm going to do my classic thing of the much shorter, punchier synopsis. To me, Imhotep is like mashed potatoes and gravy. It doesn't look like much, but it's really flavorful, and you're probably never turning it down if presented it. I think it's a great game. I am going to give this one a 9 out of 10.
Whoa.
I really liked it. I'm going to give it a 9.2 out of 10.
Whoa, stones in the water. Oh my gosh.
I don't know why exactly. Maybe I'll change that over the course of the review, but that was the number that just came to me in my head, in my gut, 9.2. I loved it. But your review, I hear what you're saying. I agree. It actually made me go down to 9, but I'm sticking with 9.2 at least at the start of this before we get into the episode. So, a little bit of background about Imhotep. As we mentioned, designed by Phil Walker Harding, published in 2016, 2 to 4 player game. It is a 2-player game. It can be played at 2, despite Imhotep the Duel existing as an exclusively 2-player game. Plays a little different. And this was one of the Spiel des Jahres nominees in 2016. So it was a game that got a lot of buzz then and maybe has faded off a little bit since. But Brendan, do you want to give us the blurbs from the committee at this time?
Yeah, so we always like to do this when we have a Spiel des Jahres winner or a nominee. So this is what the Spiel des Jahres jury had to say about Imhotep in 2016. Caution, construction site. Like what? Okay, when players, that's actually the blurb. I didn't just add that. When players work together and compete at the same time to build ancient Egyptian monuments out of chunky wooden cubes, it's a real spectacle. Obelisks, pyramids, the burial chamber, and the temple grow as three-dimensional, eye-catching sculptures. No one's ever loved cubes so much. The refined tactical mechanics with constant tricky decisions, really interesting, alongside the thematically appropriate components come together from out of the desert sands to form a well-rounded and exciting family game.
That's
Jake, thoughts?
beautiful.
It is beautiful.
I mean, it's so nice. I think it's funny. There is like such a fixation on components in board games in our hobby, especially amongst like the people who are deepest, like the biggest hobby gamers, right, have this fixation. So it's just funny to see the Spiel des Jahres committee kind of using that same kind of terminology. Like, when you hear somebody describe a board game component as chunky, that's like the pinnacle of praise.
Totally.
It's like chunky dice, chunky cubes, chunky poker chips. Like, that is what we want.
It's funny because we always go to food metaphors to describe games, but like chunky and food metaphors, not generally good a vibe. Also, very intrigued by the tricky decisions being highlighted here, and I think we'll delve a little bit deeper into that as we continue the discussion. Just because the game that Imhotep lost to was Codenames. I don't know that we'll ever cover Codenames on the show, so I feel like I should take this opportunity to read that jury statement really quickly. Codenames, of course, such a celebrated game that's really, I think, become the standout of hobby industry for games in the last 10 years. So just quickly, for posterity, here's the Codename statement. One game of Codenames is often followed by a second, then a third, then a fourth. This association game is so spellbinding that it's hard to break away from it. To describe as many words as possible using just one term without giving anything away to the opposition is like a puzzle you just have to solve, as opposed to puzzles you don't have to, which I guess exist. Good variants for 2 or 3 players make this team game a fully rounded experience. If you like juggling with language, you'll love Codenames. So, interesting to sort of see the juxtaposition there.
Definitely. Well, let's get right into your game synopsis and rules overview recorded previously by Brendan. Thanks so much for doing that. Interdecisional Spaceship. Please play the Imhotep rules overview. Beep, boop, boop, beep, boop, boop.
Imhotep is a tactical logistics nightmare. I mean puzzle. In the game, players are assigned a color of stone. Gray, white, brown, etc., and given a set of cubes that will be their primary means to interact with the game. Imhotep plays out over the course of 6 rounds. In each round, 4 shared boats are randomly selected, which players will add their stones to one by one into any of the open spots on the boat, and then later use the boats to transport those stones, likely owned by a mixture of players, to one of 5 build sites available. Each build site, the market, the pyramids, the obelisk, the burial chamber, etc., are different mini-games that offer the player different ways of earning immediate points, endgame scoring conditions, cards that give alternative scoring conditions, or single-use effects. Each turn, the player is offered a simple choice. They may 1. Collect 3 more stones from their supply and add them to their hand, never to exceed 5. Add a stone to one of the empty locations on a boat, or 3. Send a boat off to a site. Boats are shared, and efficiently timing one's turns is key to playing Imhotep well. As players add stones to one of the 4 available boats in a round, their final intended destination of those stones might be different than their opponents who've also added stones to the boat might be. Knowing when to sacrifice stone placement tempo to restore your supply or direct a boat to the exact site you'd like it to go to is important, but so is knowing when you can afford to allow others to spend their valuable actions on sending boats and instead arrange your stones cleverly so you can sit back and reap the rewards of their hard work. At the end of the 6 rounds, the player with the most points in Imhotep is declared the victor.
Thank you, Brendan, for that rules overview. Hopefully that gives people a better idea of how to play Imhotep. Let's get right into the decision space of this game. And, there's really not a lot going on beyond this one very specific decision space of what to do about your rocks.
Yeah. Imhotep is interesting in that there's 3 core actions in the game. You take stones, you place a stone, or you can send a boat if a boat's full. And those different decisions all sort of come textured with more complex decisions, right? Except for the take stones. And then it's all a timing puzzle. Everything in the game is a timing puzzle. Is this the right time to do this? Can I afford to do this now? Or should I wait later? Taking stones, you just take stones. If you're going to make the decision to place into a boat, then you have the decision of, okay, which of these 4 boats do I place into? Which slot do I want to place into? And then if you're going to send a boat, of course, is now the right time to send a boat? The boat's not full. Should I send it anyway? And I think one thing that makes Imhotep such a good game for how puzzly the end game scoring is for me is every decision you're making, you're thinking about what other players want as much as what you want.
Absolutely. I think that is the key of this game, which is because the whole game is about tempo, that necessarily means that player interaction is fundamental to every single decision that you make in the game. And that's something that I think it reminds me of like Azul in that way, right? It's like I think these games are pretty similar in their weight and decision space, and in that they're both like these great super puzzly family games where no matter what you're doing, it's impacting other people in their ability to score points, in their ability to take a tempo break to take stones, in the player order as we get into the next round. Everything is so fundamentally tied together, and I think that's just something I really admire about a game of this weight, which could otherwise be too calculable, right?
Yep.
And I think that is sort of the tension in a design like this, or like Azul, or any of these other games that I think fall into this similar kind of family game, puzzle game category.
One thing that's so interesting too about the puzzle of Imhotep is the game in a lot of ways becomes, how can I get Jake to build my birdhouse? And in most of our games, it turns out I cannot get Jake to build my birdhouse. But to play Imhotep really well is to figure out how you can get everyone else at the table to do your work sending boats for you. And to like set your stones just right such that that you could just not even, for the most part, take those actions and still be benefiting. And take those actions only when it's really the right time. I think we'd be remiss too, Jake, not to talk about the type of decision space here, because I think out of all the games we've covered, this might be the closest we've come to a static decision space. It's not a totally static game. There's elements that shift. The card market is variable. Some of the conditions of the scoring at different spots feel a little bit dynamic in terms of the value of them. But in terms of the decisions that you're making, definitely, I would say I can't think of a game that's more static than Imhotep that we've played.
Yeah, I agree. I think the shape of this decision space is, to reference a previous episode in a game we covered, is very similar to actually Jaipur in a lot of ways. Both games, I think, by and large, your decision space from turn 1 to the last turn of the game stays very much the same, though like that's like the practical, that's the experience of it, though if you're looking at like just the literal fact of how many choices and decisions you have, it is waning, in general, because there are fewer spots available on boats, or there are fewer boats left to send out, or there are fewer spaces to where you could send a boat because if another one is already there. So over the course of any given round, it does wane. Um, and then it'll open back up as you go into the next of the 6 rounds. Everything gets cleared off of the boats and the boats are reset. But I agree with you that like in practice when you're playing this game, it feels static.
Another aspect that's interesting about the decision space is the clarity of it. So you've sort of said that if there wasn't your opposing players, the uncertainty tied to them, everything would be pretty calculable. So it's like a fully clear decision space, right? Your optimal move on any given turn is totally apparent what you should be going for. And I feel like the two things that help Imhotep in making it fuzzier is your opponent's yes, but also the bite-sized nature of your actions. In a lot of games, I feel like a lesser version of Imhotep would be like do three things on your turn, because you could, and some of the power cards sort of allow this, but even those are like do two things and feel like it's really special, and it is because it's a tempo skip. Well, really you like spent a turn of tempo getting the cards, you like banked the tempo in the card, and then you play the card and then you take 2 turns in one, which I think is a really interesting design decision. But with that said, I think the bite-sized nature of the turns of Imhotep also help with the fuzziness, because it's hard to get a sense for what the game state is going to look like in a way that if players took the same amount of actions overall with their cubes in a given game, but they happened in chunks of 3, you would have a way clearer decision space because you would know how things were going to play out when you made your decisions on average slightly more, which is a really interesting thought experiment.
Yeah, that's such an interesting thing to think about. I was thinking about that too, just like what points of fuzziness are there in this game. And obviously what your opponents are going to do is not, you can make educated guesses about it, but you don't know for sure. Other than that, there are a few ways that the game does add uncertainty, but they're so small. So at the space that you can go get cards, you could choose to take a face down card instead of one of the 3 remaining. So that's like a piece of hidden information that could come into the game. At when rounds are reset, you'll get new cards available to take, and also the boats that are available in the display aren't always the same. So you may try and strategically set up a turn sequence so that you can go first in the next turn to take a boat that's just has space for 1 cube, and then there aren't any. So there are things that aren't perfectly knowable, that would, I guess, stop you from going full chess on it and thinking like 25 turns ahead, um, which is good too, I think.
Is now a good time to talk about the boat system a little bit more?
Sure. Yeah, let's do it.
Because I feel like the boat system, when I first was reading about Imhotep, the boat system in general feels like this really important glue to the game. And it's interesting because it's such a simple game, and the scoring conditions of a lot of the different spots feel super clever to me. Like the burial chamber and the way you're set collecting and how that emphasizes how your stones going in matter, but also just the boat system of, so there's 8 total boats in the game, 2 with 4 spots, 3 with 3 spots, 2 with 2 spots, and 1 with 1 spot. I did a little math. Those average out to like 2.375 spots per boat. But I just think it's really interesting how this system adds enough texture that the game doesn't feel too samey in any given one game when you're playing it to me. And it adds so much, the mind games that are added by, okay, I'd really love to load up this bigger boat with as many of my cubes as possible, because if I'm going to be the one who's forced to send it eventually, it's going to make that action more efficient. But at the same time, because only one boat can go to a location in a turn, spending a lot of effort to just sneak 1 cube on that one little boat in the dead of night onto a spot, blocking the spot and getting 1 cube in, can be really tense and dramatic in a way that's awesome. So to me, the boat system is just like so cool.
Yeah, it really, there's so much to think about there, right? In terms of like sometimes, you know, it's hard to like speak in general terms about this game because each decision is going to be predicated on the scoring that is available in that game. So each of the locations has a side A and side B. You're going to play with different combinations in every game. But for example, you might have a turn where you want to go have the second stone placed in the burial chamber really bad. So your strategy could just be to like, instead of loading up on one boat, just trying to take the second slot in every boat or as
Yeah.
many boats as you can to maximize the chance that you'll be able to go into that spot, or to because that spot is so important for you, it's thoroughly disincentivizing your opponents from sending from sending one of those boats to that spot. So they're that it'll at least like at worst remain open for you to then try again and take in a second round. But yeah, I think like the more you kind of dive into each of these systems, even though it on its surface seems so calculable, like they're just so interconnected, that you really can like go deep in thinking about them. Like on your turn, even though the decision space feels small, it's like small but deep, if that makes sense.
I think that's the nature of a lot of static decision space games that are interesting. We've talked about sort of in the context of what type of other games are static decision spaces, and so many of these games work because they're about playing in the mind of your opponents. So like fighting games also tend to be about static decision spaces. You have a few choices that don't really change over the course of the game, but because it's about predicting, or in the case of Imhotep, predicting what your opponents are doing and trying to mitigate the consequences of predicting wrong, the decision space on one hand feels pretty small, but on another hand sort of almost feels infinite because there's so many potential decisions that your opponents could make. I don't know. I think it's interesting that sort of binary between like static decision spaces tend to be small because the actual choices that you have are relatively limited, but generally the ways in which they're structured make them feel like these deep, deep pools.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's just so impressive to me that this design works at
Yeah.
all, because of how, you know, like I think when you're talking about the types of decision spaces and our terminology for describing them, it seems like fuzzy, like the fuzzier a decision space is,
Mhm.
almost like the less work the designer has to do, because like if a game is like sufficiently fuzzy to where players can't figure it out in their first few plays, like that game could be totally broken. But
Mm.
if people aren't able to like understand like why they would do this thing, they might just not figure it out and be able to enjoy the game, which is fine. Like that's not even wrong. But if a game is like really really on the clear side of things and any aspect of it isn't perfectly tuned, it's just going to be either like a solved game, which as we like to think about isn't even a game at all, right?
Yeah.
No viable decisions, because there's only one viable decision on your turn, right? So you're actually not able to make any choices. And this game feels like it's just like the decision feels like it's approaching that. Like you can almost figure it out on any given turn without ever actually, being able to do it perfectly, or you know at the point that you are able to like perfectly deduce your most optimal play, if you're playing against an equally skilled opponent who then knows, like, I know that you know this and therefore I'll change
What I want to
the
do.
right, I'll kind of flip the script on what I'm trying to do. Now all of a sudden I'm sending boats earlier when they're not full. Like it does have, I think, a space to play that's going to continue to be fun even as you get to mastery of this game.
Which I guess is part of the joy, and why when maybe my criticism of the game as being not feeling too samey is not correct, because every given table environment is going to be different. And I think your statement about trying to find the perfect play is so salient here, because so many of the games that we cover in a given game, there probably is a perfect play on a specific turn. But what makes Emotep so cool is there is no perfect play. Like that's the point of these static decision spaces, right? Is that the perfect play could end up being the absolute wrong play if your opponent in the next turn makes the decision at odds with that one. And that's just like they just turn themselves up like wind up dolls and then run forever.
Yeah, yeah. But I do think, to your point, like it the static decision space is the right way to describe this game because of And it's because of, I think, the clarity that
Yeah.
helps make it feel that way. You could easily see, we've used this example before, but like if you're playing chess on a popular chess app, it, and you can review your games, and it will tell you like who's got the best percentage to win based on this board state, and then you can see how it changes as moves are made and whether they're like optimal or not. You could easily picture something like that existing for Imhotep. And I don't think it would even be like that. I mean, I'm not a computer programmer. Obviously, it'd be incredibly challenging, but it seems like very possible that some system like that could easily exist for this game that would be able to like tell you, the type. Oh, like that wasn't an optimal move. Like you could have done this, and that would have increased your chance of winning by 3% instead of like
Yeah.
going down by 7%. Um, so it is that type of game. And I think that type of game is always going to feel samey to some extent, just like chess, just like Go. Um, but the thing that isn't same is you, and
Yep.
you're playing at a better level. So you're able to like continue to explore and grow in the system. And I really think, Emotep, what has impressed me so much about it, why I give such a high score, is because I feel like I'm like learning and growing in
Mm.
every single play of this game.
There's a lot of room for efficiency that's hidden. I think, or not even efficiency, because you can't actually be super efficient in this game. Everyone, like I said in my summary, everyone gets the same actions overall. Even with the power cards, you still get the same amount of actions. It's not efficiency. It's like efficiency in terms of doing the right thing at the right time, even though overall your agency is still the same, which is really interesting.
I would argue there is efficiency in this game, and I think, in my opinion, after I don't know 8 plays or so, I'm not trying to say I'm an expert, so this could be way off base. I think efficiency is how many times you send boats
Mm,
over the course of the game. The more you are sending boats, like the less efficient your game is, because those are actions that you're not placing stones on boats that give you points, or taking stones which give you the ability to then place them and get points.
sure.
And over the course of and there are definitely times, of course, when the right action would be to send a boat because the value is so high to you of, it could be the difference of like, okay, if goes to the obelisk, that's 10 points for me. If it goes to uh, the burial chamber, that's only going to be worth 2 points to me, something like that. So yeah, it might be worth that hit in efficiency to send a boat there, but I do think, just as like a level one, trying to position yourself in a way that people are doing your work for you and
Yeah.
sending your boats to places that still get you points does to me feel like efficient play.
Yeah, I think that's really fair. There's also that's the mechanism too that becomes so interesting, because it's the mechanism for which you can be a scoundrel, and I think that that's one of the greatest things about Emotep 2 is there's definitely those moments where you put in all this effort, your precious actions, you move these chunky stones into the
Oh,
boat,
the
you've
big chunky stone.
completely loaded up, you know where it's going. It's going to that burial chamber. It's classic Phil Walker Harding, triangular scoring. You're going to sink 3 chunky stones into the barrel chamber in the exact right spots. You've spent 3 whole turns waiting for it to happen. And then Jake over here kicks it over to the obelisk where you're 5 stones behind. So it does nothing for you. And you're just like, God, this game is infuriating, but it's infuriating in a good way.
Yeah, um it's infuriating, and I think the best kind of way, where it again, right, it's really playing on that player interaction,
Yeah.
and you can be so cutthroat and mean, and it's like also funny, and it's not take that, um
Yeah.
that I
One
think
great
it still works for like families and even people that like it's like gently nudging people into some like take that confrontational play that would hate it if it was like a Risk or a game where it's like, I'm gonna
Sure.
come wipe you off of this territory that's your home.
And I think the brilliance of that too, the reason why that doesn't happen is because of the shared nature of the boats, right? It's not like you have a boat and I have a boat and like, take that, Jake. I just sent your boat over there. It's like my cubes are in it, your cubes are in it, Joe's cubes are in it, Paul's cubes are in it. So there's this intermingling in a way that softens the potential for take that in a way that it like really obfuscates, like, am I just trying to screw you? Sometimes that's there, but a lot of the times what is hurting you is helping me and maybe neutral for someone else. So it kind of comes out in the wash and it doesn't feel personal. It's just business. We're just
Yeah.
trying to be the best builder in Egypt.
And we should also say probably the two-player game is significantly more cutthroat than
Sure.
it would be in a 3 or 4 player game, as you would expect. Just the other point I wanted to make about the decision space in general is how bewildering I found this game when I first played it. Like in the first couple of plays, I was just like, what is going on? Like I could
Mm.
not, like my brain could not connect different actions to like points at all. It was, I don't know why, if that's just me being silly, but like the
Mm.
decision, like the points and the decisions felt like so abstract. It's like, okay, I guess I'll put this rock on this boat over here, and it's a little bit difficult for my brain early on to kind of like track like why would this spot be better than this spot over here, especially when you're playing with like 3 or 4 people. It's like, okay, I could put that there, but they could send it to like any of these spots. Like, does it matter? But over the course of play, uh, you just become so familiar with the different scoring options, and it becomes like really more like easier, I think, to like kind of focus in and hone in onto like what, like why you would want to be in the second slot on any given boat based on like all the scoring things that are present, or why you'd want to be first, or why you'd want to try and get as many onto a single boat,
Mm.
or why you'd want to diversify. Um, and I think those are things that are like, while it ultimately we could say is like calculable, it does feel fuzzy at first. And I don't know, I've just really kind of appreciated the amount of growth I've experienced in mastery of the game, even from, you know, the amount I've played it. Not saying I'm a master of this game at all, but
Yeah.
I,
Yes,
I feel
yes.
I feel like the amount of like mastery I've been able to achieve over the course of a few plays is like enormous compared to like how much I feel like I'm able to improve at just an average game or even a game I really like over a few plays. Like I feel like
Sure.
I've gone from just like complete novice to like very skilled, but still like able to like see the room to like go so much higher.
Yeah, that's awesome. And those experiences in games are some of the best. When like you play them and you didn't realize how deep the game was and then all of a sudden it feels 3 times as big as you thought it was. That's like the best type of game.
Because when we were playing with you and Joe early on, I think I was just like, I do not understand like what I am doing at all in this game.
Do you
Did
think
you
that
feel that way for you?
I okay, so I'm really intrigued by so much of what you just said. At first, when you were talking, I was like, "Oh, Jake had his Feld monocle on," which is what we talked about in the last episode. How sometimes you can get a little bit Euro-y in the way that you're looking at decision spaces and points, right? Where you're like, "Okay, how does this action convert directly? What is the point payout going to be?" And I could see how Imhotep would stymie someone who had the monocle a little bit too close to their eye in trying to like figure out what the average value of a given action is because it is pretty fuzzy and how it's going to shake out. But then I was like, oh, is Jake describing the sensation, the same sensation that the Spiel des Jahres committee was talking about when they were talking about those tricky decisions? And I feel like it might be some combination of those two things. And I'm really intrigued about that like phrasing of tricky decisions, because, like you're saying, all of the information is there. And I think but because of your opponent's actions, it's hard to ultimately calculate completely that you can do things that mitigate it, like slotting all of your stones into slot 2, knowing that no matter if it goes to the obelisk or the burial chamber or the pyramids, you'll at least get some payout that's helpful to you given the game state. But so we've come up with this framing in the past. Like decisions are choices that are equally viable and push you towards winning a game. Choices are what they sound like, anything you can do in a game. So are like fuzzy decisions something that we haven't considered yet in this like spectrum of choices and decisions where it's because of the nature of the game, you can't really know, right? You're going with some value judgment based on what you think your opponents are going to do, how you think the randomness in the game is going to play out. So, in a lot of games we've played and covered on the show, there are decisions and there are choices. And Emotep, because of your opponent's actions, there's only fuzzy decisions and choices.
It's so funny that we're now using that framework for a game. At the beginning, we were talking about like, oh, this decision space is like almost perfectly clear, and now we're like, are there any decisions at all? Everything is so unknowable, and
Yeah.
and I just feel like all I really can add to that is to say like, to me that demonstrates like how perfectly uh,
Mm.
the designer has walked this line of making this puzzly, really family weight game into something that I think anyone can enjoy, and it just shows to me like we talk about like walking this line between making things clear and understandable and but not perfectly knowable. And I just think like this conversation shows that like that line has been walked perfectly down the middle.
I think one thing that's so interesting about Phil Walker Harding as a designer is okay, so I'm going to juxtapose him with Reiner Knizia. Reiner Knizia, of course, one of the most impactful designers on the hobby. He's made all these incredible games, and I think their games are pretty similar in that they both like to distill things to their most base idea. But I think what's so interesting is that Phil Walker Harding does this, and he just tries to make it as clean as possible, whether it's Imhotep or Sushi Go. And the twist comes from your opponent's choices. It's really hard to evaluate what the right decision is in Imhotep. Based on your opponent's actions, and it's same with Sushi Go because what's going to be the best depends on what's the best for everyone else and what will make it back to you. That's an early classic drafting game that most of you probably know. Whereas like Reiner Knizia is someone who really likes to distill games to their most base version, but I think his platonic ideal in a lot of his design aesthetic is like, what can I do to like twist the game space to have this one confusing turn that adds complexity. And in my mind, they both are like pursuing these same ideals of really simple distilled games, but then where they go to add that one little piece of texture that makes them so interesting is totally divergent and gives their games such different feels, while both being sort of aesthetically ideal of the same school of like, I will refine and shave away this game to be something clean that anyone could play.
Yeah. I haven't played that many PWH games, but I do agree with what you're saying, and I feel as though perhaps games like Sushi Go, like this design identity or ideal, is something that really makes them perfect for like families,
Mm.
as like gateway games, if you want to use that term, to not necessarily to like bring people into the hobby, but to enjoy with everybody. And I think Sushi Go and Imhotep, who I have played, are just perfect examples of that. And this was also something, Paul talked about in that other episode. So give him credit for kind of bringing this idea forward. He's the president of the PWH fan club, as many know, which is that like there's like a base point value associated with an action.
Mm-hmm.
In Imhotep, right, putting a rock on a boat is getting you somewhere between 1 and 3 points, almost without exception. So you could say like the average value of placing a rock on a boat is 2, and the difference between skilled and novice players is going to be just like a slightly increasing the average value of placing a rock on a boat. Just getting a little bit more. So if you play perfectly throughout the game, maybe instead of averaging of 2 points, you're averaging 2.3 points or 2.4 points per rock place, by leveraging like what your opponents wants to, knowledge of the board and the situation. Um, and so like there is a tremendous amount of ceiling there, I believe, to get better and push that limit of how good you could possibly do in this game. But at the same time, anybody can jump in and they're not going to do bad. Like they're still going to score, on average 2 points per stone placed. And they're, the scores aren't going to be that far apart. And I think like the exact same thing is true in Sushi Go. Like you can't really have a horrible game in either of these games. You're always going to be doing productive things. You're always going to be accruing points. Um, even if you don't understand it at all, as I did
Mm.
in like my first play of the game, Imhotep. Um, but that doesn't mean there's not like huge skill ceiling and separation between novice and expert play. Yeah.
I agree with that because I do think that your evaluation of like the average value of a turn is there. But with Emotep, I do think the design, because the design of some of the locations gives you just enough room that you could really mess up. Like if you somehow, if another player had a ton of stones at the obelisk and you were in second, and someone kept directing your stones there, then those stones, just their points could end up being, just depending on the side of that location, 0. Your burial chamber stones, you could keep like having them set there in a way that they just don't connect at all, right? Or with the, because the burial chamber, okay, the obelisk is all about getting lots, just a density of stones in that location. You just, it's like area control, getting the most in there. Burial chamber is about creating these connected rows across columns. um you could also, at the temple, just place them there when they're going on top of your stones. These are all mistakes, but because Emotep is a game where like other people can force you into mistakes, it could happen. And
I
go, sorry, you respond.
Okay, I'll push back just a little bit because if somebody's consistently sending your stones to a place where they're unoptimal, that means like they're the ones sending your boats, which we've already discussed is like not efficient. Um, so perhaps, I mean, that could happen in a 2-player game. In a 3-player game, like again, like you wouldn't be incentivized to, if you're already wasting efficiency by sending a boat, you wouldn't be incentivized to like keep targeting the same player. So I hear what you're saying. Like, yeah, you could do really bad, but I actually think kind of the rails of this game is still going to be like guarding players against that, because in any more in a 2-player game, right? Like, sure, that's always gonna be the most cutthroat, but in any more than that, like to do that is actually like the game is like guiding you away from that, because if you're doing that to somebody else, that means this other player over here, they're going to be the one taking advantage of you continually like picking on the new player.
I was being too pedantic. You're
Yeah,
never
yeah,
going to blow someone out like you could blow someone out in Castles of Burgundy or something, right? There's not going to be 250 to 60 points or something, or 50 points. Like that type of span just isn't going to happen in Emotep. You're all going to be between like mid 30s to like 50 something, maybe slightly higher.
yeah.
Yeah, I'm with you. One thing, I think this might be the best point to discuss is like comebacks. Because of the nature of that type banding and scoring, comebacks can be really hard. There's not a lot of spaces that give you that really huge comeback potential. The obelisk we've talked about gives you potential for the biggest swings, probably, because in like a 2-player game, the player with the most stones there gets 10 points, and the player with the second most stones gets 1. So that's potentially a really big swing that can happen. Some of the cards can give you a fairly big swing. If you draw really late in the game, one of the cards that gives you like 3 points, or 1 point for every 3 stones in the burial chamber, and the burial chamber has just one of the locations that's been hit every single round with large boats, that could be a big payoff. But like in general, because the average value of the turn is so close, it's, once you fall behind, it can feel frustrating and not have room to come back.
I think that's a really fair criticism of the game, and I agree. It's this is a 6-round game,
Yep.
so if you are slightly behind after round 1, that's okay because you still have 5 rounds to catch up. But if that person extends their advantage and wins again slightly in round 2, that's a bigger hurdle now with less time to do it. And by round 3, if the same dynamic is taking place, which you maybe would expect if it's 2 players of different skill, like you might as well call the game at that point, because the chance of you know in 3 subsequent rounds uh suddenly like switching and beating your opponent by the same margin you lost by in the first round is pretty unlikely. So I do agree. I think you can definitely feel out of this game by the midpoint in it, and that's unfortunate. So I agree. I think that's fair criticism. I will say, uh, you know, as a defense, I think that's true in this genre of games. Like when you think about kind of these abstract, static decision space games, like the same thing is absolutely true in chess. The same thing is absolutely true in Azul. Uh, Typically, right? Like I think it's like by nature of that decision space, uh, and kind of the simplicity of this game. Like it's tough to also have one to where there's like a built-in catch-up mechanic that doesn't just feel, really forced or just like layered on top of the game.
And you can come back. It's not like there's not some potential, but
But
yeah,
you have to like work on it. You have to like work overtime and be like consistently outplaying your opponent. There is no real catch-up mechanism
totally.
to
I'm
speak
not
of outside of like maybe if your opponent scores more points in round one, but they have like no rocks and you're ending round one with 5 rocks in your supply. I guess that's like could be now they'll be forcing to like take at least one off tempo turn.
Yeah, totally. I will say we did have one game where you were beating me like 30 to 15 and I did get back. You still beat me. It ended up where I lost by 2 points, which did feel pretty good. It felt
I
like
was getting nervous in that
yeah.
one.
Well, it's because of that obelisk spot, but ultimately
But
it came
I
down to one
realized
stone.
like at a certain point in that game, like I didn't have to compete on the obelisk. Like
Yeah, yeah, you
you
did.
had
Yeah,
to, and I could then just go to other spaces.
totally.
Uh, and so you know, and that's kind of like where I was, where I when I hear the all the way back to your committee remarks on this game from the Spiel de Yarrow, I always think tricky moves is like, to me it's like there's really room for like clever plays that like your opponents may not feel. And like I felt like at the very end of that game there was like a time when you played a rock on the first spot of the boat and I'm thinking like, oh, you're gonna go try and like secure the obelisk, and I'll put one on this other boat. And then I had the opportunity, maybe you did go to the obelisk, I can't remember exactly, but I had the opportunity to put a second rock on the same boat. And I knew, like, the thing that went through my mind was like checkmate.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
no matter where, like no matter, like if you place the rock somewhere else and you give me the opportunity to move this boat, I'll be able to like go get these points that you won't be able to counter if you move this like somewhere else to where I won't get as many points, which is what you did. And I think that was the right play. That was like maximizing the possible benefit to then like you're giving me boat control, basically the tempo advantage on the other remaining boat, to where I'm still going to be able to, even though it's going to be close because I've given up the obelisk, like there's no way through this line that you'll be able to like overtake my score.
And that's the brilliance of the system. I had already lost because you'd created this exploitable imbalance in how much we needed different locations. This is what we've been trying to get at, right? Like I'm building your birdhouse in that situation because just because I had to have any chance, I had to focus on the obelisk, which meant if I need something to go to the obelisk, I have to be the one who spends the turn sending it there because only 4 of the 5 locations are going to be used in a given turn. So if I'm just like, okay, I'm going to sit back and like, even if somehow I got all the boats to be helping me, which means I'm not sending boats to a location most likely, and I started the round and I've loaded them up and Jake is following me, even then I have to be the one who sends it there and take that off tempo turn. And that's already an exploitable weakness that like I had no chance because Jake could find the points elsewhere. And that's so cool. That's the hidden game underneath Imhotep that makes me feel like I should have just stuck with the 8 that I'd like been considering and thinking about for the week. And it makes me want to go back to. Are you going to buy this game, Jake?
I think I do want to, because I just think it'll be like, I've talked about this a bit on the podcast. Most of the my time spent gaming at the table is playing with people who are only gaming at the table with me at my
Yeah.
house. So like, not really. There's people who like love games and enjoy playing games. I'm not trying to be like gatekeeper or that, but aren't like full on hobby gamers to where they're like researching games, playing games online, listening to and creating podcasts, but are people that like enjoy games,
You're
which I
the
would call occasional gamers. And I think this game is going to absolutely sing,
yeah,
at my table with these folks that I love playing with,
totally.
for all the reasons I mentioned on this podcast.
I think anyone who fulfills that sort of role in their gaming community of like collection curator, where like they love playing games, but you're their game outlet. I think this would be a great addition and would hit with so many different tables. It would also hit with families. We talked about how it's a family game, and I will say as a dual game, like if you have a super try hard friend who like has that reputation for being wanting to get really competitive in games, this could be something that would serve you well too. It's not going to have those really exciting moments, but I think if you're both invested and care about the outcome, it's going to be a fun race.
Yeah, if you like playing something like Azul 2 player and that like which also becomes at 2 player like a super cutthroat and tactical game, I think this is very much in that same vein. The other thing interesting about this is 2 player game, I mentioned at the very beginning, there is also Emotep Duel or Emotep the Duel, which is like specifically a 2 player game built on the same theme. I have played both and I prefer Emotep, the base game, at 2 over Imhotep the Duel at 2. Both are available for free to play on Yukata, so I recommend checking that out. But I do think it's interesting to like create a dual variant of a game, which already kind of rocks as a 2 player game,
Yeah.
in my opinion.
It's definitely trying to squeeze some milk out of the stones, but I respect it. You got to do what you got to do. Also, publisher is Cosmos, and they're known for 2 player games, so
Mm-hmm.
I could see it fits in their product
It's
line
a good
pretty
game.
well.
I enjoyed playing that one too. It's it's fun. Feels, but the I think the puzzle there is more. It's like it reveals itself quicker. Like
Yeah,
in the first play, I'm like, okay, I get what's happening here. Where in this, I was like, what is this?
sure, totally. Can we really quickly touch on the card system because I feel like we'd be remiss not to talk about it slightly.
Sure, let's mention it.
Okay, so these are like there's a one of the locations you can go to is the market. The market allows you to take a draft of either 3 face up cards or 2 face down cards and you get to pick between them. The first player with the first stone in the boat that goes gets the first choice. There's green cards which are end game scoring, statues which are just like classic Phil Walker Harding triangular scoring, so you're getting increasing benefit the more you get, but not exponentially so. You're just trying to set collect them basically. There's blue, which I've talked about already, are like you're investing in a double turn because you're spending a turn taking one of these blue cards, which I think is pretty interesting. And it takes a turn to play it. You're doing that it's sort of like a hidden fourth action in the game. And then there's red, which are immediate effects. So they basically give you flexibility, right? You've dedicated a stone going to this location, but you could like slip one stone into the obelisk, even if the obelisk already has a boat at it. And I think these offer some needed and interesting variability. At first, I was like, what are these doing in the game? Like, why are these here? They felt out of place to me. And then the more I played, the more I appreciated how interesting they made the decision space because these are like the dynamic outlet at the, if it's a static turn structure, this is like the dynamic hose sticking out of the side of the building.
Yeah, I really like the cards and their design. I think again, like the tricky play thing,
Yeah.
like you can do things that are super clever
Yeah.
with the blue cards in particular. And we keep going back to this, like this game is 100% all about tempo. So the fact that like the blue cards and the red cards too to some extent like allow you to just like break that rule in the game is so incredibly powerful in a way that feels hilarious because like so much of the game is like I need to place this rock in these 2 spots and which one is going to be more valuable to me, and having that blue card in your hands like actually like I'll just play both,
Yeah.
or like the simple like the one I think it's like is it hammer that lets you uh get 3 rocks and place one. So you
I
just
think so.
skip your off turn. Like it doesn't sound like much, but it feels so great. Like
Yeah.
it just feels like you're absolutely boosting ahead of people. And so I feel like these blue cards are really strong and something I've been kind of prioritizing getting in our games. And you do mention like you're spending a turn to get that to even out. But if you're not the one who sent the boat there, it's like it's not exactly like a
Yep.
free turn, but it's like a 1.5 turn.
It's the same amount of agency, but because they're grouped together, the marginal value I feel like of the actions is zero point 0.5 higher. Like it
Yeah.
really is significantly better. And it's also because you have the choice, right? You're going in and you have the flexibility. So if any of the flexible outcomes are good for you, you'll have more information for one. And two, I really feel like the all of the blue cards, the double tempo. So there's also sail, add a stone to a boat, and then send it. All of these in Emotep, the marginal value of 2 actions at once is more than, compared to one action and then one action, is more than nothing. Like, it matters that they're grouped together, and that's really cool.
Yeah. The red ones too are cool because like just knowing that they're there can be really informative of your strategy. Like a lot of times it's like if there's like a red card that lets you put a rock in the burial chamber and
These are the immediate effects when you
yeah,
take a red card. Yeah.
and you want to put a rock in the burial chamber, like just knowing that like okay, like I don't have to worry about sailing this boat because if I go here or here,
Yeah.
like just having that knowledge really changes the decision space in super interesting ways. So I just think the design and the statues are cool too. Adding like a little set collection thing going on can really force people into interesting situations where they might just like need to take a statue away from you, or else it gets like out of hand really quickly. And then also, of course, like green endgame scoring in some ways is also breaking the tempo because it's like allowing you to get points for placed rocks that aren't your own. So I just think like again, these cards are so well designed in a way like that I can't think of any way I would change them. Maybe like an expansion that like brings in some more cards could be cool, but like I just feel like this base set is so perfectly balanced that, and it could have gone off the rails here so easily that just like it really shows. It's like it just like it's like great chefs make simple food, at times, and like it shows their skill where you're like, oh my god, like I've never had like this is just an egg, and like how is it like so amazing? And I feel like this game is a master designer like showing you like there's nothing behind right like the curtain here. It's like it's showing you everything. It's so simple and yet it's still like so perfect and fun that like I think that's like why I like just feel like this game deserves such a high rating for me.
Imhotep is the perfectly poached egg.
Yeah, maybe that. I should have gone with
Episode
that
title.
instead of the mashed potatoes.
um Also, dude, I'm so mad at you. I like came into this episode and I was like, I'm a straight shooter. I'm excited about the game, but I don't think it's that incredible. And I'm like, am I gonna buy the game? It's definitely an 8, at least. Everyone I know would enjoy it. It might not have the pizzazz, but like, who needs pizzazz when you have the perfectly poached egg?
Right.
There is an expansion. It gives you more locations and a bunch of cards. It to me feels like different but not better. Is what I haven't played it, but that's the sense that I get, and I feel like I could just not get it or care. But
Right.
maybe we'll try it on Yukata. I don't know.
Yeah, I would try it out, but it does seem like yeah maybe we'll try it out and report back, or when we do our look back in 1 year's time, we'll we'll be deep into the expansion of this one. But yeah, it's fun. I'm gonna continue playing it. I mean, I think just like my closing thoughts on this game, I've obviously been raving about it. I feel like if our friend Paul Solomon was here, he would be echoing me, if not even giving it like a 10, and he's the guy I really respect his opinion and thoughts on games. So I know I'm not alone in gushing about this game. I think it's one when it first came out, I saw I was like, okay, it's like another one of those like popular family weight games like Azul, like Sagrada. I feel like there's like one or two games every year that come out and are like a big hit for families that are just like a simple rule set. And when this one came out, I was like, well, you know what? I already have Zool. Like, I feel like I have this game niche in my collection. So it was one that was easy to look past. And I think if you're someone who did that, like try this one out. There's way more to it than meets the eye, and I think like that even could be revealed by just listening to this episode or just listening to the rules overview or even like watching a play of it. I think this is kind of one you have to experience, and it's so quick to play that like if you love games, like why not give it a shot? And finally, like perhaps like the thing I like most about this game, besides the fact that like I really have a hard time thinking about like things to be really critical of it. Besides, perhaps for some people it'll be too calculable. Perhaps like the fact that like there is no comeback mechanism. Some people might just not really vibe with that type of clear static decision space. So that's fine. Like there are reasons to not like this game, and if that sounds like you, maybe not for you. But like even beyond that, what's been so fun about this game is it's just like cracked us up when we play it.
Mm.
Like we're talking like on our Discord, we're constantly talking about like
Boat
boat
control.
control, like investing in big rock. Like it's just like this game that's like so funny to me and like really makes you feel uh like it makes you feel when you're playing it like that bastard just sent my 3 rocks over here, like that's not what I wanted to happen. Or like I can't believe I'm like helping this person like do exactly what they want, but like I have no choice. And it's just like, you know, as we're talking, I hope some of that has come out where it's like a lot of times you just feel like like when you and Joe are so mad about like my position in our game and like how can we stop him, and I'm just like sitting there just like, you know, wringing my hands together like I've already drank your milkshake and you
Yeah.
don't even know.
Totally. There's a lot of drama in Imhotep in a great way. In some ways you can imagine like a workplace drama, but it's Imhotep and we're builders and we're like, you know, like underhandedly chopping each other down. But I don't think I could have said it any better than you. I feel like my only criticism of Imhotep at the end of the episode might be that I feel like I've learned more from its design than I've had fun, but I've had a ton of fun with it too. So in my book, that's a win.
Cool. Well, thank you for listening to another episode of Decision Space. It's been so much fun chatting with all of you in our Discord about your top 10 games from our last episode. That's been awesome seeing what people think of our lists, and also just to talk through like the process of like people going through their pub meeple collection and like the games that have surprised them by winning a number of fights. I know Wonderful Plays in our Discord was surprised by how many fights Jenga was winning, and just stuff like that has been so fun. So please don't hesitate to jump into our conversation there. We have always share a link to our Discord community in the show notes. It's a great and welcoming place, even if you're like not familiar with Discord or think it's going to be like too complicated or difficult to like get involved with. It's really not. I would highly encourage checking out because the discussions we have in there are great and it's a lot of fun. Um, so I just wanted to show that one more time. Brendan, anything for you to promote, Shill?
Yeah, I'll put on my Carnival Barker hat real quickly. You can follow Decision Space on Twitter at Decision Spa. It's not our most active account, but we would love to be interacting with more people there. So if you are a Twitter user and you'd like to chat with us about any of the games we've covered, anything about Decision Space, or just about Chunky Stones, you can do that at Decision Spa on Twitter. You can also follow myself, Brendan Hansen, at Burnside BH there, or Jake at Jake FRYD. You can contact us via email if you'd like at decisionspa at gmail.com. And also, we've been getting a few comments on our BGG blog where we post our links to episodes every week on there. It's just called Decision Space. I've really enjoyed those and appreciate those. If you want to chime in, even if you want to say something funny like boat control, it'll bring a smile to Jake and I's face. And thumbs on those posts are always appreciated. It helps more people discover the show.
Cool. Yeah,
Yeah.
and well, as always, thank you to Hembry for their song "Reach Out," which we use as our intro and outro music. Thanks for listening, and enjoy the rest of your game.